Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the webinar on the fifth call of the NAMA facility. My name is Janka Claude. I'm the Deputy Head at the Technical Support Unit of the NAMA facility, and I'm moderating today's webinar. We are very pleased to see once again a high number of participants from all over the world who have registered and are now attending this webinar. Thank you all for joining us today, and a very warm welcome to each of you. This is the second of two webinars to provide you with some information on the fifth call of the NAMA facility. The objective of today's webinar is to introduce you to the NAMA facility's fifth call and the steps required for the submission of project outlines. We will also clarify frequently asked questions. Remember that the fifth call was launched in November, and the application deadline is on 15th of March, so rather soon. On the next slide, you can see the TSU colleagues who are involved in today's webinar. Starting on the left is Charles, followed by Tina, Ash, and myself. Tina and Charles are in charge of the technical functioning of the webinar. Ash, Charles, and me, we will guide you through the content of this webinar and will answer to your questions in the Q&A sessions. I would now like to give you an overview of today's agenda. In a moment, my colleague Charles informs you on some technical settings of this webinar. Following that, as the first part of today's webinar, I will provide you with a general introduction to the NAMA facility's fifth call and our selection criteria. To give you a better idea of what we expect from NAMA support projects, Ash will then present in the second part of this webinar 2 examples of our current NAMA facility project portfolio to demonstrate how some of the selection criteria spell out in practice. Following Ash's presentation, we will have a brief Q&A question and answer session where we will be happy to reply to any queries you may have until then. In part 3, Charles will guide you through the outline template and its annexes. And finally, the fourth part is dedicated to frequently asked questions that you have been submitted to us since the launch of the call and further queries that you can submit while we are presenting. Now Charles will guide you through some technical aspects of this webinar. Charles, please.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Janka, for that introduction. Right, first, I would like to provide a quick introduction to the webinar's control panel, which you can see here on the right of the PowerPoint slide. Feel free to follow along on the screen as I will walk you through using the mouse. Let's take a look at some of the controls in the control panel settings. First, you can view the webinar in full screen using this button. This could be useful as the session will be accompanied by a presentation. Second, you can adjust the language of the control panel using this globe icon, which you find at the top of the control. Where we ask you that you submit any questions you may have throughout the session. To do so, open the question tab and type your question. Will be the only ones you can see it, and we will answer the questions in the Q&A sessions after each session. So please, we encourage you to submit any questions you may have during the presentation, as and when they occur to you. In the event that there are some more questions on our website, together with a recording of the webinar. And finally, in this webinar presentation, there are several links included that you can click on. These will also be working and available in the uploaded PDF of this presentation, together with a recording of the webinar. I will now hand things back over to Janka for a brief introduction to the NAMA facility.
Thank you, Charles. So let's turn to the first part of today's webinar, where I will briefly introduce you to our fifth call. First of all, what is the NAMA facility actually looking for in its fifth call for NAMA support projects? Well, the NAMA facility supports developing countries and emerging economies in implementing ambitious, nationally appropriate mitigation actions called NAMAs. That is, to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in a specific sector in the country. These NAMAs should demonstrate that they are country-led and embedded in national strategies and plans, and that they are integrated into sector-wide programs or policies in the country. We expect that each NAMA can demonstrate an explicit reference to the country's nationally determined contribution, in short NDC, as NAMAs can function as a building block for the implementation of NDCs as defined under the Paris Agreement. For inducing transformational change in the sector or subsector, the NAMA should tackle key barriers in the policy and regulatory framework and other relevant barriers that limit investments and constrain low-carbon development in the country. As the NAMA facility's focus is on the implementation of these mitigation actions, supported NAMAs should demonstrate how they are developing and applying maybe innovative financing mechanisms that attract further or at least in the important to fund a complete NAMA as such. Additional financial means from partner governments, banks, and other private sources will need to be attracted. As you can see in the good to know box on this slide, the NAMA facility remains committed to its objectives of supporting the most transformational NAMAs. That means that while we have now a simplified application procedure and provide more support for the detailed preparation phase, the expectation level with regard to the substance of the NAMA and the state of preparation remains high. We recommend you to check out our website for our previous webinars, NAMA facility publications and lessons learned to get a better understanding of the level of expectation. In the limited time of today's webinar, we can only the offer of the NAMA facility. The NAMA facility offers support to countries in implementing their sectoral and subsectoral mitigation programs as part of their NDC implementation. For this, the facility offers a funding volume in the range of 5 to up to 20 million euro for so-called NAMA support projects, in short, NSPs. These NSPs have the implementation period of 3 to 5 years. Each NSP comprises a tailor-made mix of financial and technical support instruments. In addition, the NAMA facility offers extended support for the detailed preparation of NSPs once they have been pre-selected in a call. The support includes financial support and technical advisory, for instance, on the detailing for detailing the financial support mechanism. We will return to this point later today when we are addressing the outline template and in the FAQ session. Probably of interest to you is also that the NAMA facility donors intend to avail up to 85 million euro for this fifth call. That is in fact the largest overall funding volume for a call ever made available since the inception of the NAMA facility. Last but not least, there's good news for those who have been following the NAMA facility for some time now. After major changes in the previous call, this fifth call saw only minor changes in the process and documents compared to the fourth call. We continue to follow the guiding principles of a simplified documentation, being accessible to an enlarged circle of applicants and enhanced support for the detailed preparation. Unfortunately, we cannot cover all aspects and details relevant to the fifth call and the NAMA facility in general. So let's take a quick look at the central sources of information, where you get more information and more detailed information. All of these documents are available on our website and will be linked in the presentation of this webinar that will be sent to you and uploaded to the website. The core document for this fifth call is the general information document. It provides you with the essentials on the rules and requirements and processes applying to this call. In fact, I want to mention here that we also provide a Spanish and a French version of the general information document. Next to it, you see the FAQ and clarification document. We update these clarification notes on a monthly basis. The next update will actually be published already next week on our website. The document comprises clarifications to questions that have been submitted by potential applicants by email and during the webinars. Have a look at this document, as probably a number of your questions is addressed already in these clarification notes. The outline template and annexes are, of course, of central importance to all submitters. As all the previous documents, this template is available at the website under the 5th call section. Later in this webinar, you will take a closer look on the template together with my colleague Charles. Participants are also encouraged to review our previous webinar on the 5th call, where we introduced the NAMA facility as such and talked in more detail on the selection criteria in the 5th call. Then you can see the Inspiring Ambitious Climate Action document, which is a very good source for you to get a better general understanding of the NAMA facility, its objectives, and its place in the global climate finance landscape. Last but not least, the monitoring and evaluation framework and its guidance sheets to our 5 mandatory core indicators will help you to get a better understanding of how we measure and monitor the financial leverage, transformational change, and mitigation effects in NAMA support projects. Parts of the outline template, in fact, directly linked to this monitoring evaluation framework. So have a look at it. Now, before we look at the process and timeline for the 5th call, here a very quick reminder to all of you. Please remember to submit your questions as they arise so that we may address them during the Q&A session later on today. Now, turning to the processes and timeline, let's have a look at the overall process on the 5th call. As you can see here, the process is sequenced. You find the legend for the respective actors on the upper left-hand side. Let's start from the lower side on the left. Here you see the stage that you are currently in, or we are currently in. After the donors have announced and launched the 5th call in November, the call is now open until 15th of March 2018. As mentioned before, all documents relevant to this call are available on our website. While the call is open, the Technical Support Unit conducts 2 webinars. This one is the second one. And we are also publishing clarification notes. As in previous calls, national sector and climate ministries, as well as qualified legal entities, are invited to prepare NAMA support projects and submit these with the respective outlines to the TSU latest on 15th of March 2018, 3 p.m. Central European Time. After the 15th of March, an external assessor team will be in the lead to review the eligible submissions in an initial assessment. We from the TSU will assess the outlines in parallel and share our observations with the external team. Ash and me will talk shortly today about some of the selection criteria. For a broader introduction to the selection criteria that applies to this call, please check out our previous webinar. Based on the assessment results and recommendations, the donors of the NAMA facility decide on a shortlist of NAMA support projects. These shortlisted NSPs are further assessed during the on-site assessments that are conducted by an external assessor and a TSU member. The donors then take a decision which NSPs are invited to further detail their project during the so-called detailed preparation phase, in short, DPP. For this DPP, NAMA support projects receive financial support from the NAMA facility. The ultimate output of the DPP is a detailed proposal. Please note that the donor's decision to provide the funding for the DPP does not mean that the NSP automatically receives funding for the implementation. Also, the provision of funding for the DPP will be linked to the demonstration of sufficient progress after 6 months and the achievement of crucial milestones during that period. The maximum duration of the DPP is 18 months. Depending on the state of preparation, NSPs, of course, can propose shorter durations for their DPP. At the end of the detailed preparation phase, the DPP, the fully fledged proposal for the NSP is submitted to the NAMA facility. The proposal undergoes a thorough assessment here at the TSU, and these proposals and the assessment results, of course, will be the basis for donors to decide to provide large-scale funding for the implementation of the NSP. Only those proposals that show sufficient quality will be recommended to the donors for funding. Once donors have given their approval, the NSP starts its implementation, which lasts 3 to maximum 5 years. During the implementation, a very close interaction between the TSU and the NSPs continues. The NAMA facility itself understands itself as a learning hub. We want to build up practical experience on how to finance NAMA implementation and avail these lessons from the ground to a broader audience like the global climate community. As I promised, we now take a quick look at the selection criteria that NSPs are assessed against in the fifth call. Ash will then give you 2 examples of our NSPs, how these translated the criteria into practical action. All submissions that we receive by the 15th of March will be checked for their eligibility. This is a very formal set of criteria, basically a yes and no criteria, that you can find in the general information document in Chapter 5. Eligibility criteria include the timely submission before the deadline, the completeness of documents, the ODA eligibility of the country as defined by the OECD DAC list, a maximum implementation period of 5 years, and also other criteria. Please take a look at this short but concise list in the general information document. The second step in the assessment process is a qualitative evaluation of submitted outlines. For this qualitative assessment, we apply 2 equally weighted assessment criteria, ambition and feasibility. Both criteria are scored with a maximum of 25 points, and both consist of a number of sub-criteria. Ambition is composed of the following sub-criteria: the potential for transformational change, the mitigation potential, and the financial ambition. Feasibility is composed of project rationale, project design, and the concept for the detailed preparation phase, DPP. The previous webinar went into further detail here. Today, my colleague Ash will focus on 2 ambition criteria, transformational change and financial ambition, and provide some examples from our current project portfolio. This should help applicants to get a better picture and understanding on how selected NAMA support projects have been designed and responded to these requirements. Before I hand over to Ash for these case studies, please be reminded that you can submit any questions as they arise in the chat function of this webinar. We will address them in the Q&A session or latest in our upcoming clarifications. So Ash, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Janka, for your explanations, and hello to everyone. First of all, regarding financial ambition, it should be noted that the mobilization of public and private funding, i.e. leverage in terms of national public contribution and private sector funding, are key for inducing change towards a low carbon development pathway. The financial leverage and level of concessionality should be appropriate level relative to the sector and the country. We shall revert to this shortly. The detailed criteria used by the TSU for financial ambition in our evaluation are as follows: the removal of financial and economic market barriers, the significant private sector participation and significant public budget contributions, and the participation of other financiers, for example, commercial or possibly development institutions. Achieving significant mitigation using limited public resources requires the leveraging of NAMA facility funding. For example, through the use of revolving loan funds and risk-sharing instruments. The NAMA facility favors maximizing concessionality leverage, but this depends on the country, i.e. the level of national income or the level of indebtedness. So therefore, we would seek to provide the greater concessionality for the lower income countries, and middle income countries, for example, would receive loans, for example, at market rates. It also depends on the sector and the beneficiary context. So, for example, the affordability and vulnerability of those sectors. Co-financing is important, but the mobilization of private sector finance can, in our experience, better assist in terms of rapid scaling up and long-term sustainability of projects. As with all financial instruments submitted to the NAMA facility, there should be a close alignment between the technical and the financial components of the proposal. The financial scheme should be up and running within 12 months of the start of the NSP implementation phase. Much of this design phase can be undertaken during the detailed project preparation of the DPP. The scheme should have an element of flexibility, should allow for evidence-based feedback loops, which, for instance, require that if mechanisms are not working fast enough, there is an opportunity to change allocation criteria or to redirect funding to get things back on track. A phase-out concept should be included also. So this addresses the issues around what will happen to funds beyond the lifetime of the NSP and how will these be governed. And finally, the NSP should ensure that there's no distortion of local markets nor the crowding out of other investors or suppliers of capital. Next, we consider the case of the Chilean self-supply renewable energy in NAMA. Here we have a goal of achieving a mitigation of 1.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent over 25 years, directly mobilizing $100 million in private sector investments, which would account for around 45 megawatts of additionally installed capacity across a range of project types, including rooftop solar and solar water heaters, which are the main focus of this NSP, but also technologies such as heat pumps, biomass, biogas, mini wind, and micro hydro technologies. Now, the financial mechanism here is centered on a partial loss guarantee facility of 11 million euros. This guarantee facility would cover potential losses to commercial financial institutions who would lend to owners and developers of small-scale renewable energy projects in Chile. This part of the financial component incentivizes the private financial institutions to lend to this category of projects, which they would not otherwise do. In addition, there is a package of pre-investment grants to cover feasibility studies and also investment grants, and these will assist in the development of a project pipeline. Furthermore, there are associated capacity building activities for the financial institutions themselves. The guarantee expects to cover losses and default risks amounting to up to 80% of the outstanding principal of a loan, subject to a maximum amount. And this reflects a sharing of risk between the financial institution in country and the NAMA facility. Next, we turn to the potential for transformational change, where we will seek to assess the NSP's potential for transformational change, i.e. its ability to sustainably redirect the flow of public and private funds towards greenhouse gas mitigation actions, and the political will towards these mitigation activities. These should translate to laws and regulations in the best case, which will make the changes irreversible. The detailed criteria that we use for transformational change in our evaluation are as follows: government commitment and endorsement, the embeddedness in national strategies, including co-benefits as drivers for implementation, and the linkage to the NDCs. The catalytic effect and scope, the replicability and scalability of national and or regional level, and the sustainability, as I mentioned, this irreversibility of change. We will now consider these aspects in the next example. In the case of Thailand, we look at a NAMA facility financing program in the refrigeration and air conditioning sector, which seeks to increase energy efficiency in the cooling sector with targets to improve efficiency of appliances, thereby demonstrating the embeddedness in the national sector strategy, and is also part of the an explicit part of the roadmap for the implementation of the Thai NDC, which has been approved by the Thai government. This demonstrates the government commitment and also the linkage to the NDC. The cooling sector is already responsible for 25% of all greenhouse gas emissions in Thailand. If current growth rates continue unabated, that figure could climb to 50% by 2030. And this represents or demonstrates the relevance of the NAMA and the mitigation ambition. So the NAMA support project, the NSP, seeks to support producers and assemblers to convert production lines and offer energy efficient appliances which are based on natural refrigerants instead of synthetic refrigerants, which have a damaging climate impact. Here we are demonstrating the irreversibility of the change and the sustainability of the change. In terms of the increasing market penetration of these energy efficient appliances, the program seeks to move to around 1.3 million units, reaching a share of 20% in the market, which would result in the reduction of the energy use of these users and also engagement with the retail sector. So here we are demonstrating both the catalytic effect and the significant scope of activity. Finally, we note that Thai manufacturers are regional exporters of these appliances, and therefore the introduction of natural refrigerants in the Thai air conditioning sector could impact markets beyond Thailand. And this is an example of scaling at a regional level.
Okay, thank you, Ash, for providing these insights into how current projects have responded to the ambition criteria of financial leverage and transformational change. While we were talking, a number of questions have been already posted in the chat function. Let me quickly remind our audience that questions that come in today, but also written questions, of course, to the NAMA facility will be addressed in clarification notes that the TSU will publish every month, with the next one scheduled for 8th of February. So let me pick up the first question that came in today. We have talked about the fifth call. One participant is asking whether the NAMA facility prioritizes any sector or technology or in the project selection. And the related questions, are there any technologies that are actually excluded from support? Ash?
Okay, thank you. Well, the short answer is no. The NAMA facility has no sectoral focus. So in principle, NAMA support projects from all sectors that have a relevant mitigation potential are eligible. However, applicants are required to demonstrate that the NSP supports transformational change towards the low-carbon pathway in the country. As I mentioned before, our interpretation of this transformational change encompasses a significant technological shift that is quicker than business as usual, that is irreversible and is permanent, i.e. does not slip back to the situation before the project. So there should be a strong political will and commitment to implement these changes. We have found that certain technologies targeting a fossil fuel switch, a reduction of gas flaring, for instance, upgrading and modernizing fossil fuel-based energy generation, such as coal, are likely to find it challenging to demonstrate the potential for transformative change. Maybe one last remark on your question. From previous calls, we've seen these challenges from the same sector or technologies, and we've compiled these lessons learned for a number of sectors, including waste, energy efficiency in buildings, cook stoves, forestry, agriculture, and supply chain approaches. These lessons learned are available on our website.
Okay, thank you for that extended reply. Now, maybe a shorter reply to the following question. Actually, one of our participants is asking, and linking the question to your presentation on the financial ambition, does the NAMA facility recommend a specific ratio between public and private funding mobilized by the NSP?
Well, the short answer is no. The facility does not make any recommendations or requirements in this respect. In fact, the leverage ratios of public and private finance do differ significantly across sectors and countries.
Okay, that was quite clear. Thank you. Before we move on to the next part, one last question with a hopefully equally short answer. Can an individual investment project, like, for instance, a PV plant or a wind farm, apply for funding from the NAMA facility?
Again, no. The facility supports sector-wide mitigation actions rather than single investment projects.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ash. So thanks to all the participants for the questions. We will have a second Q&A session to address further questions. Now let's move on to the third part of today's webinar. I will hand things over to my colleague Charles, who will guide us through the outline template and its annexes. Charles, please.
Great, thank you, Janke, and thank you, Ash, for your words. Let's now take a look at the sections of the outline template and the 5 required annexes. The purpose of this part is really to help you use the template to its maximum advantage, so you can construct a clear and comprehensive outline for the call. I will try not to get caught up in too many intricate details, but rather highlight those sections where there has been confusion in previous submissions. Now, the overall structure of the outline is unchanged from the 4th call. However, some additional guiding questions have been added in order for us to get a better gauge better elements for submission. We suggest completed outlines to total about 20 pages or 100,000 words. But please keep in mind, this is not hard and fast, but rather a guiding suggestion. In addition, we do expect that the entire outline be submitted in English, and no later than the 15th of March, 2018. So I'd like to start by introducing you to the very first section of the outline template, seen here under the general information title on the slides. It is here that we ask you to provide some preliminary information about the scope and length of the proposed project. It is worth remembering that the project supported by the NAMA facility must last anywhere between 3 and 5 years, and one should really not plan to extend the implementation of the NSP beyond this time frame. Another important piece of information you should add at this point is the amount of money that is being requested for your budget. The NAMA facility asks that this should fall between 5 and 20 million euros, although there is room for a small amount of flexibility when it comes to the hard numbers. Additionally, it is important that at this stage, the applicant check that the project qualify for funding under the official ODA criteria developed by the OECD. We have provided a link to the ODA criteria at the bottom of the slide. Please note that this criteria has changed quite recently, and so we encourage you to check your eligibility before submitting the outline. Many of the NSPs involve the collaboration of a host of different stakeholders, actors, or groups. Let's take a closer look at who these may be and who are involved in the outline process. So, apart from the national ministries, central roles are given to what we call the applicant or applicant support partner, implementing partners, and the NAMA support organization. So you may ask, who are these functionaries? What are their roles? Let's start with the applicant or applicant support partner. Due to the fact that the NAMA facility can't contract directly with national ministries, when the applicant is a national ministry, then a partner applicant, which we call the applicant support partner, must be identified and included. This way, the applicant support partner acts as the contracting partner for the detailed preparation phase and is a legal entity that should have sufficient capacity and experience to ensure a sound and detailed preparation of the NSP. However, we want to stress that the legal entity does not necessarily need to have the capacities and experience necessary for the NSP implementation. If it receives sufficient endorsement from the relevant national ministries, it can function as the applicant and submit the outline to the NAMA facility. In this case, the applicant support partner will become the contracting partner for the detailed preparation phase. Please pay special attention to the applicant or applicant support partner box in this slide. It contains an overview of the detailed requirements for this role. Once again, you can find this information and the rest of the requirements for the position in the general information document. Examples of NAMA applicant support partners include national and regional international development banks, think tanks, the UN, and multi and bilateral development agencies, NGOs, foundations, public utilities, or agencies and national foundations. Next, let's take a look at another important actor involved in the process, namely the implementing partner. These are key national partners in addition to the national ministries involved in the NSP implementation process. Implementing partners are existing entities with specific mandates and relevant experience for the implementation and operation of the NAMA. The list of implementing partners might be extended if necessary. The typical examples of implementing partners include national ministries and other public or private entities and financial institutions, such as development banks or the Ministry of Finance. Implementing partners are expected to be existing entities with the above-mentioned required national mandate, and they're also expected to possess the relevant experience needed to implement and operate NAMAs. And lastly on this slide, we are also asking for information on the NAMA support organization that will become the contracting partner for the NSP implementation. However, we simply expect information indicating who could be an appropriate partner at this stage. Now let's move on to section 2. The first part of this section provides space for a general introduction of the proposed NSP, along with the inclusion of a barrier analysis. Put simply, this is where you write about the project and is really the substance of the proposal. The questions and accompanying text here in this section are simply presented to help you guide you as you develop a description of the NSP. On the left side, there are links to helpful tools and documents that we have on our website. You can find the tools later by clicking the links in the presentation that we will distribute following the webinar. We strongly encourage you that you review this information and these tools to prepare the outline submission. While filling in this section, we hope you have a chance to provide some interesting details about the NSP, including, for example, the relevant political and institutional context, the rationale, and the aims of the project. In particular, we want you to spend some time thinking about the specific barriers the NSP is designed to confront. We call this barrier analysis. For this analysis, we recommend doing the following. In the first step of the analysis, describe the essential key barriers that are preventing a transformation of greenhouse gas emission trends in the specific country. These barriers can take different dimensions and can be, for example, financial, regulative, or technical challenges to greenhouse gas mitigation. In the second step, Outline which one of these barriers the NSP addresses and how they are addressed, and who else is working on the barriers. The NSP should not try to circumvent the barriers, but rather aim to eliminate them altogether. This will help improve the transformation aspect of the NSP, which, as Ash explained earlier, is really the raison d'etre of all the NSPs. Turning your attention to the project rationale section on this page, labeled part 2.3, here we want you to spend some time explaining the objectives of the NSP, and specifically, how you foresee the project making a difference by the end of its implementation. Understanding the impact of the project is an important part of the outline evaluation, so the clearer you make this part, the better. Moreover, emphasis should be laid on describing the target group in this part too. It would be useful for us to have a comprehensive picture of who the exact beneficiaries of the project are and the way in which they stand to gain. The second part of section 2 contains space for the elaboration of crucial features of the NSP, the first of which contends with facets of the project concept. The first part of this should include details surrounding the kind of technology and the business model proposed for the NSP. We consider a convincing business model that incorporates the proposed technologies crucial to the broader impact of the NSPs. In prior calls, many outline submissions failed to deliver adequate data in this section, so please be sure to provide a well thought out model supported by robust data, quantitative and otherwise. It's important to add that if the project involves some form of new technology, we would expect that a pilot program be established to demonstrate its capability. However, unfortunately, we would not be able to support the financing or implementation of such a pilot, as we are solely concerned with the upscaling of such initiatives. Moving on, the technology and business model are important in building up the identification and introduction of the proper financial support mechanism. Once again, we would like to stress that a sound financial mechanism is a central piece and should be presented as clearly as possible with the greatest extent of detail. The NAMA facility focuses on enabling transformative investments, not on technical assistance. As with the technical component, we cannot stress enough that adding hard numbers and quantitative data at this point in the proposal will be very important. Looking down to the bottom of the slide, we see that embeddedness is also a crucial element of the NSP. Our facility considers NAMAs to be the implementation vehicle for nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, in the context of the Paris Agreement. Therefore, the linkage of the NSPs to the NDCs is very important and should be very clearly demonstrated. Another aspect of the embeddedness is how the NSPs interact with sector support policy. In other words, we would like to see a clear overview of how the NSP integrates with current policies in the sector. Consider, for example, if there are any overlaps or synergies that can be harnessed or built on. Last but not least, sustainable development co-benefits are seen as the important driver for change in the country. Therefore, co-benefits must be integrated into the information on the embeddedness of the NSPs. Now moving forward, section 3 is intended to present in detail the NSP's ambition potential for transformational change, financial ambition and mitigation potential. Ash's examples early in the webinar today may help you conceptualize this part. Nevertheless, we strongly recommend considering the M&E guidance and tools provided by the NAMA facility, links to which you can find on the left of this slide, both now and following the webinar. One important aspect of this section of the outline is to provide hard numbers in order to describe the mitigation ambition. It goes without saying that these numbers should be explained as much as possible and the assumptions behind them clarified and tested. This will help us quantify the impact of your project, especially in regards to the greenhouse gas emissions. Furthermore, we do highly encourage the submission of the optional Annex A and Annex B for that matter, where direct and indirect mitigation potentials can be indicated. Here in section 4 of the outline, we would expect you to clarify the hard numbers of your financial ambition, at least those that would be considered directly mobilized by the NSP. This will give you the opportunity to showcase where financial contributions will be needed and the different sources from where these funds will come. If the NSP is projected to deviate from the recommended NAMA facility funding range, which again is between 5 and 20 million euros, it would be appropriate here to provide justification for the granting. of such an exception by the NAMA facility. To that end, please note that for the NAMA facility's fifth call, the €5 million funding range is slightly more flexible than in past calls. Again, please simply provide the rationale for any funding range deviations. Now, if you foresee more than one financial mechanism, please also specify any additional one in the table and indicate the individual financing source. In the last part of the table, there is space for you to include the direct and indirect costs associated with the NSP. Make sure that in your cost structure, you include your overheads, cost taxes, and expenditure for monitoring, communication, and so on. Okay, so now that we've gone through the main body of the outline, let's also have a quick look at the required annexes that should be submitted along with the outline. In the first section of the outline, you should have identified the respective ministry or line ministry that corresponds to the relevant sector. And you should have listed a ministry contact. You should have also made clear that the outline submission has the support from the ministry in charge of climate change and the UNFCCC negotiations. That said, in Annex 1, we expect endorsement letters from these national ministries. We would like to stress that the endorsement letters are much more than a formal requirement. They give an idea of the level of political and possible also financial commitment of the national political partners. The content of these letters is carefully studied and considered during the assessment of the outline. In Annex 2, the log frame is a planning instrument for project development, with which most of you should be familiar. It likely goes without saying that the log frame and the main body should be consistent. It is important to remember to include all 5 management indicators of the NAMA facility and to align your results as closely as possible with the format provided in the indicator guidance sheet that is highlighted on the slide. This will no doubt make our lives much easier when it comes to evaluating your outlines. The log frame should also show all relevant assumptions and risks for the NSP to reach its output, outcomes, and impact. Indicators should refer to the NAMA facility's mandatory core and sector indicators and include respective target values. In this Annex 3, you are asked to provide information and reference regarding the legal entity that serves as the applicant or applicant support partner, which has become the contracting partner for the detailed preparation phase. This information will be used to assess whether the proposed applicant fulfills the capacity requirements. It is therefore very important that relevant references and information are provided. In Annex 4, the concept of the detailed preparation phase, or DPP, should be presented. We don't need a comprehensive step-by-step roadmap at this point. However, the concept should demonstrate a clear plan of how to develop a sound, fully fledged proposal, including the identification of questions and issues that remain unaddressed. It should also identify essential stakeholders for the project preparation, as well as the resources and methods that are needed. Finally, at this point, you're invited to express interest in the DPP expert pool. The pool of experts includes international financial experts that have worked with financial institutions. It also includes experts in project development and design. If you decide to use the services of the DPP expert pool, you should indicate this at this point of the outline submission. In Annex 5, you are asked to provide information and references on the NAMA support organization. Again, at this stage, the NSO selection is not necessarily fixed, but if you know who this will be, then here is your chance to let us know. Please note that the proposed applicant or applicant support partner and the NSO are the same legal entity. There is no need to complete Annex 5. Moving lastly onto the optional Annexes A and B, please note that these are found in the 5th qualification documents as 2 separate Excel files. And while these annexes are optional, we do encourage applicants to complete them as thoroughly as possible. However, we would like you to follow the structure provided by the Annex for greatest clarity and comparability. The Annex also provides space for the calculation of NSP's mitigation potential, including assumed reductions from a business-as-usual baseline. In Annex B, you can break down the connections between the NSP's business model and the features of the financial mechanism. This Annex will enable a better elaboration of the suitable financial mechanisms and an assessment of the project's economic viability. Be sure not to overlook the fact that Excel files containing Annex B has 3 separate sheets in total. So that was the overview of the new outline template annexes. It should also be understood that these templates should only be for the applicants of the 5th call of the NAMA facility. And of course, you can find these templates on the NAMA facility website under the calls for projects. The submission deadline is on the 15th of March. Please submit the complete outline in English to the NAMA facilities email address.
That was a long session. Thank you very much, Charles, for this comprehensive introduction to the outline and the annexes. Before we open the Q&A session for the webinar's participants, and we got a lot of good questions today, we would like to take a moment and have a look at some frequently asked questions that were submitted to us since we have opened the 5th call. Ash, maybe to give also Charles a break, we can clarify in tandem a bit the following issues on the project design, eligibility issues, and so on. So here we go. What is the difference between outputs, outcomes, and impacts?
Okay, well, the outcome is the overarching direct project goal and the direct effects that can be causally attributed to the NSP intervention. And reflects the utilization of the output by the target group, whereas the output may include products, goods, services, and regulations or standards that have arisen as a result of the NSP's activities. And the impacts are the long-term direct and indirect effects of the NSP.
Okay. As we're looking at the log frame, or we were looking at the log frame and related questions, we mentioned before the 5 mandatory core indicators. Which indicator should be considered as an impact, outcome, and output indicator?
Okay, in that case, M1, that's the greenhouse gas emission, M2, the people directly benefiting, and M3, the likeliness, or likelihood rather, of transformational change are outcomes. And the outputs are M4 and M5, which are the public and private finance mobilized.
Okay, thank you, Ash. That was quite clear. Then we have another set of questions on the project design. Is it mandatory to propose a combination of technical and financial assistance, or would it be possible to just propose a technical component or a financial component? And last but not least, does the NAMA facility require any specific ratio between the TC and the FC, so the technical and financial component?
Well, as a rule, both components should be included. So the outline should have both a technical and a financial component. The facility does not set any restrictions regarding these, the types of technical support measures that can be undertaken. I think that's a question that was raised in some of the questions just now. However, the technical assistance should be linked to and enable investments in low carbon technologies. We don't apply a minimum ratio between the requested funds for financial and technical support to allow for the different needs of support that appear in different countries and sectors. But nonetheless, it is expected that the NSP should demonstrate that the funding provided by the facility directly leverages funding from other sources for investments into the climate-friendly technologies. For guidance, the NSPs approved to date for implementation from previous calls have typically had an average TC to FC or technical to financial support ratio of around 40 to 60. And the NAMA facility is aiming to increase this ratio of financial support in future projects in line with the donors' expectations.
Okay, thank you, Ash, for that explanation. On the eligibility of countries, Charles, you might be best placed to answer. Can you clarify once more whether any country is eligible for support?
Well, no, that is not quite correct. Not all countries are eligible, but many are. As donor commitments is earmarked ODA funding, the country of implementation must be ODA eligible throughout the entire NSP implementation period. the country must be included in the OECD DAC list. As I mentioned before, the OECD has updated the list very recently, and anyone in doubt about the country's eligibility should take a look at that list.
Okay, that was a clear answer, thank you. Can you also clarify whether one country could submit more than one outline in the fifth call?
Yes, of course. There can be a number of relevant and ambitious mitigation programs in one country. Actually, we encourage you to propose several to the NAMA facility. Actually, in our previous calls, 2 NAMAs in Mexico were chosen exactly for that reason.
Oh, okay. So that's again a clear yes. Many requests also refer to or address the eligibility of organizations. So let's focus on the most frequent ones. Can you once more clarify who can actually submit an outline to the NAMA facility? That is, who can be the applicant?
Well, the applicant can be a national ministry or an entity that fulfills the eligibility and capacity criteria and who has received endorsement from the national government. Okay,
clear so far. But what is then the difference between the applicant and the applicant support partner?
As the NAMA facility cannot directly contract national ministries for the detailed preparation phase due to the administration reasons, if the applicant is a national ministry, then the NAMA facility requires an additional support partner called the applicant support partner, or a legal entity as a contracting partner. This legal entity could also submit the outline itself if it has sufficient endorsement from the relevant national ministries. In this case, the legal entity would be called the applicant. In either case, sections 1.2 and 1.3 and 1.4 of the outline template must be completed, and the endorsement letters from the national ministries must be submitted.
Okay, thank you very much. But once again, what is the difference between the applicant support partner that you just elaborated and the NAMA support organization, or NSO? Can one legal entity be in fact the applicant support partner and the NAMA support organization at the same time? Yes,
the short answer is yes. A legal entity can act as the applicant support partner and the NSO if it complies with the capacity requirements for the NSOs. The distinction between the 2 roles was introduced to extend the possibility to participate in the 5th call to entities that have the experience and capacity to design projects without necessarily having the mandate to implement them. Note that the capacity requirements for the NSOs are higher than those for the applicant support partners.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Charles. Ash, maybe you can explain a bit more on the support that the NAMA facility is providing. Specifically, can the TSU provide individual advice, for instance, on the eligibility of a specific technology sectors or organizations?
I'm afraid not. We want to ensure a transparent and fair and a competitive 5th call. So we can't do that. We have had some queries from potential applicants. Individual consultations would provide an advantage to certain applicants, and we don't want to distort competition. However, as you mentioned before, we do regularly publish information in the form of clarification notes, and I would recommend that people look at the application documents so that everyone has the same opportunity to access this information.
Okay, thank you. As we are running out of time, we have to speed up a bit, but bear with us because we are still addressing a couple of questions. So I would propose that we do extend a bit, like by 5 minutes or so, our webinar. So does the NAMA facility provide any financial support for applicants in the preparation of the submission, so in the preparation of outlines?
The short answer is no. We focus on implementation. Support for development of NAMAs should be sought from other sources.
Okay, thank you very much. Talking about the DPP expert pool, how can an NSP make use of the expertise?
Okay, as you mentioned, as was mentioned before, this consists of pre-selected experienced experts with backgrounds in financing and project design. The expert pool is an optional offer to NSPs, which may save time in tendering, for example.
Okay, thank you very much. With regard to the selection criteria and the process, could you please clarify what fits into the category of indirect mitigation potential? We learned before that the indirect mitigation potential was usually a challenge for proposals and or for to be presented in the outlines.
Yes, that's true. That's true. The indirect mitigation refers to emission reductions outside the immediate project boundary. So, for example, if we are installing 500 megawatts of renewable energy during the lifetime of the project, the mitigation effect of this amount would be considered the direct mitigation. Of course, after the NSP lifetime, further new installations may well be expected to occur without support directly from the NSP. For instance, if the technology prices have been reduced or better financing conditions have been put in place with the support of the NSP, the mitigation effects from these additional capacities would be an example of indirect mitigation effects.
Okay, that seems complex, but certainly worth to specify in the outline. You mentioned earlier the financial ambition. Does the NAMA facility require a specific leverage amount for each euro of the NAMA facility support, and that is expected to be leveraged? Or in other words, is there a specific leverage ratio?
Well, no, there's no specific leverage ratio. It depends very much on the project and the country context. But for guidance, we did calculate that in the first 3 calls, there was an observed ratio of 1 to 7, i.e. each euro of NAMA facility funding would leverage 7 euros in total of domestic, public, private, and other co-financing. But I would stress again, there's a large variation between the NSPs on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Ash. Actually, there's a related question in our chat function, and the question came from Matthias with regard to the calculation of the leverage ratio. The question is, when I calculate the ratio, do I have to take the technical assistance component of the funding into account or not?
Yes, by all means. The NAMA facility funding takes the total amount.
Okay, and since we have you here, and we were already talking about financing, Dimitros was asking if there is, in case there's no public funding contribution, but a lot of public commitment through policy interventions, reforms, tax incentives, and so on. How is that considered in the assessment?
Yes, that will be taken into account and would be considered favorably. Again, we do want to, we want development partners to enact policies and reforms in taxation and other schemes to move towards this low carbon pathway.
Okay, thank you, Ash. And then one last question, one last question on the finances. Can the NAMA facility invest also in the operations and maintenance? That question was put forward by Regina.
Yes, the answer is yes, but I would counsel that you would need to consider the long-term sustainability of that contribution, and we would assess that also.
Okay, thank you for the short answer. Another question came in, and Charles, maybe you are best placed for that. On the NSO, does the NSO need to fulfill, like the NAMA support organization that is the contracting partner for the implementation, does it need to fulfill the criteria, the capacity criteria of proven experience in investment, climate finance projects alone by one entity, or can it be a consortium?
Well, yes, the NSO can fulfill the criteria just as a consortium as well.
Okay, thank you. That was a clear and quick answer. A next question is on the, I need to sort out my papers here, sorry for that. There has been a question from Suhaila asking whether a proposal can be submitted with less than 5 million euro. I understood that more than 20 is not, it could be justified, but is it also possible below 5 million?
Oh yes, another short answer. The short answer is yes, but of course you need to have a good explanation and reasoning why that would be the case.
Okay, thank you. Ash, there was one question from Andre, whether the definition of a NAMA within the UN framework is a requirement to apply to the facility. So, or can any action working on mitigation be submitted to the NAMA facility? So, in other words, is the label of a NAMA required or prerequisite to requirement to submit an outline to the NAMA facility?
Well, the short answer is no. We don't require an official designation as a NAMA.
Okay, thank you. And Ash, since you're here, there was another question from Pierre, who is asking whether the NAMA facility funding can be gradually replaced by a government tax. So is that an accepted process for financing mechanism?
Well, yes. We are very open to the innovative use of domestic funding. So if there were revenues from an appropriately levied government tax that could provide a sustainable income source, then that would be eligible. It would be important, I think, to demonstrate during the DPP phase the level of how secure this funding would be and what the commitment is from the government to raise and to avail these domestic resources, and that's something we would look at in all cases.
Okay, yes, we really are overshooting time now. Unfortunately, we have to call it an end today, and our time is coming to an end. But we did receive a number of very good questions, and please be sure we will definitely pick them up in our clarification notes, and we'll come back to you next week. Please also remember that you can submit any additional question to our email address at any time before 1st of March, when we publish our last clarification rounds. And last but not least, you will be provided with a link to the documentation of this webinar per email. And for information on the NAMA facility as such, you are invited to register to the NAMA facility newsletter at our website. Thank you very much for your participation and for all your good questions. We from the TSU side wish you a very pleasant day today. And of course, we are looking forward to your outline submissions on 15th of March. Have a nice day.